Has managed to continue to be a poet, continue to be a scholar, and continue to be a social activist and literacy activist, and working with community organizations to help make literacy a real active social force in people's lives. So I'll tell you a few more things about him. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, grew up on Army posts. Again, we know that from reading the preface and his White Coat chapter. Earned his BA at Cornell, worked then in farming, manufacturing, carpentry jobs, and then went to medical school, as he wrote about in the chapter we read. He taught science, math, and English for 6 years at an urban alternative high school in Philadelphia, traveled in Mexico and Central America in 1980, and received a Master's of Education and Certification in Biology from Temple in 1982. So you were really going back to Temple, where you had been before. Did an MA in Literature and a PhD in Composition Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's currently the Director of First Year Writing and a Professor of English at Temple. He also directs New City Writing, the community outreach arm of the writing program. New City Writing sponsored the Temple Writing Academy for 4 summers, 2007 to 2010, and supports students working with Treehouse books, again, that we read about. What an engaging opener, a frightening opener to your preface, with the police car zooming up and down the street, and somebody getting shot there right in the middle of your meeting. We had to say, this doesn't sound like Villanova.
You got a lot more cars around here than we used to, I'll tell you that. Way more parking problems.
Really? Well, it's changed. We get beautified here at Villanova, I don't know, every other year or two, and it's changing some. I don't know if you've seen, probably not yet, maybe you'll have a chance to walk over. Remember the Oreo? Well, it's in a different location now, not too far away, but that again is kind of greener, and it's changed a little bit, and the Conley Center is a little different in that whole area. So let's see, things that he's written in composition. His focus in Round My Way, Authority, and Double Consciousness, and 3 urban high school writers. That was in 1995. More recently, his essay on community-based learning called Alinsky's Reveille, a community organizing model for neighborhood-based literacy projects, won the 2005 Omen Award for the most influential article of the year in college English, and serves as a chapter in his book, Because We Live Here, Sponsoring Literacy Beyond the College Curriculum. It was published in 2007, and that book won the Council of Writing Program Administrators' Best Book Award in 2008. His new book is Writing Home, Literacy, and Self and Community, published by Southern Illinois University Press very recently, and his poems have appeared over the last 30 years, so he didn't have to give up poetry, in small literary journals such as the Cincinnati Review, Hambone, Paper Hubbub, and your books of poems include Journeyman's Song, Session 162, Speech Acts, and Without a Trace. In addition, Eli has published 2 children's books. Leo Loves Round. Leo is his son, who probably doesn't love round so much anymore since he's 24.
He loves round on cars. He's almost 26.
26. Our kids grew up too fast.
He's 6'2".
Oh my goodness, yeah. And Lisa and the Moon Sheep, both from Harbinger House in 1920. So Eli, thank you for coming back to Villanova. It's great.
Oh, no. Thank you so much for having me here, and I've been looking forward to this all for a couple of weeks now. It's when I got here. Well, of course, Evan was a young assistant professor when I started here, and so he really remembers our first forays. We were hired together to start a writing program here, and we used to say after one of our meetings that we felt like Coca-Cola salesmen in the Soviet Union, because everybody wanted to develop a writing program and nobody had, and it just hadn't been happening. So it's just it's great to be back and know how long and how well you worked on making a writing program here. There were no classes like this, and Because I don't know if there was even a classroom in this place.
Well, you know what this was? This was June Lytell Murphy's journalism room.
Oh,
so
right.
it has a long history of journalism.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
right. I was
Yeah.
down here once, once or twice. I got in trouble a couple times there. Well, okay. Thanks so much for having me here. Because I'm a writing teacher, the way I like to start almost everything I do is with writing. So I'm going to do this, I'm going to pass around index cards. And on, and index cards have two sides. So on one side, what I'd like you to do is write a little about what you think. Why do you think people write memoirs? And more, I think what I'm particularly interested in is, what do you think authors get out of writing memoirs? On the other side, if you could put one or two questions that you have specifically for me for what you read for today, or if there's anything else you want to ask me that I can decently answer. So one side is about why authors do it and what do they get out of writing memoir, and the other side is a couple questions, if you will. I brought some show and tell with me, but before I share with you some things that I brought, what thoughts do you have? Why do people do this thing?
To preserve their legacy.
Preserve their legacy. What do you mean by
or
that? Give me an example of what.
So people remember them. I don't kind of get your story down on paper so it lives on.
So it's partly also then a matter of an intervention with mortality, right?
Suppose.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. People might think that they have like a good story to share and they want to encourage other people or inspire them. It might be something with like social change or social action, or if they have like a story or a past like traumatic experience, maybe they want to share it so other people can read it and be like, oh hey, I'm not alone, and they feel comforted by that.
Yeah, I like the not alone part. We're always moving in groups, but we're also always alone. And I think in many ways one of the big things in this book is really trying to figure out the alone together polarity, which is not really a polarity because there are all those in-betweens. But the only thing I'd say about the inspire part is that a lot of people say they want to inspire other people, but I don't think that's it. Maybe that's the first impetus, but you don't go through all the. I mean, this is a difficult thing to do, to write about your life, and I think in a certain way you have to do it for selfish reasons first, because it's just too much to do. Because I want to write this book because I want to inspire somebody else. In the end, maybe you could inspire somebody else. Maybe to reach out to other people, yeah. Maybe to defeat death. But I will tell you that there were days where I would come down, my wife and I get together for dinner, and she'd say to me, well, what year are you in now? And I said, well, I spent most of the day crying about 1979, So, I mean, it's although there were some really great things about it, and I very much enjoyed doing this work. It was really hard, and there were a lot of times that were not fun at all. So you got to have some kind of. That's what I mean about what do you get out of it. Karen mentioned an article I wrote about Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky was a community organizer who kind of started the idea of community organizing. And one of the things that he said in that I really took to heart is that you have to be really clear about your own self-interest in almost anything you do. It doesn't mean being selfish. It doesn't mean being greedy. It means knowing where you are in the world and what makes you do things. And you have to be really honest with yourself about some of the things that are very personal, and when you make do your actions. If you just do things for seemingly altruistic reasons, then you're not being entirely honest, because any altruistic reason also has some internally logical reasons, which is not a bad thing. I know that's not a good thing to say in a Catholic university, and it wouldn't sound so good in a Jewish university either. But all guilt aside, we do things for things that we want ourselves out of the world. Anybody got some other ideas? Why would you do this thing? Yeah.
To make sense of what's happened in your life.
Yeah. Now, what do you mean? I agree with you about that. What does that mean?
Well, just going along with what you said about trying to figure out where you are and where you're going, I think if you, at least for me, writing things down that have happened helps me sort of sort out everything that's taken place and sort of categorize and figure out where I am, I guess.
Right. I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of times in my life, I did things I didn't necessarily know why I was doing them, and even when I thought I knew why I was doing them, it turned out that that's not really why I was doing them. You know. So yeah, and I think writing always writing has always helped me, even if it didn't actually give me the answer. It did help. Somehow it just helps clarify. It helps give you a kind of. It's almost like you get so far ahead of yourself, you need some way to get the rest of yourself there. You know, if that makes sense. But I agree. Making meaning is I think it's a really important reason we write anything. Anybody else?
I said it was like a chance to become a character, because I know a lot of the times it's a lot easier to talk about yourself if you're not really talking about yourself.
Right.
Like if you're like, oh, well, Amy says this, but you're not saying, well, I feel like this.
Right.
So it's a chance to like make your life fiction almost.
Oh, that's interesting. I think that's a really good point, is that, you know, people will always say, well, is this fiction or nonfiction? And if it's nonfiction, it's supposed to be true. But I can't tell you. I can be pretty certain that I have most of the dates right, because for one thing, the internet is unbelievable. I went to a talk in here about a conference I went to. Well, I didn't go because I wasn't allowed in, but it was one of the early women's conferences. It was held at Yale in New Haven, and I went with my girlfriend and her close friend. And it was a women's only space, so I did other things, and they went to the conference, right? Until the last day where they let men sit in the back. And I was able to find a flyer for that conference on the internet in a very short time. This is like, this is 1972 or 73. With who was speaking at the conference and what the order of the agenda was, astonishing. So I can verify that certain facts are more or less what other people would say those facts are. But you have to make this stuff up, because you can't remember the dialogue, or even if you remember it, you're fooling yourself if you think that it's necessarily true. It's just, and I think I would add another thing to what you all have said already that is related to this legacy thing and also related to inspiring other people. I don't know if you've already started to experience it, but you will as you go along. Sometimes you tell stories about yourself from your family or from things that you've done. You tell them over and over again. Meet a new person, you tell the same story. After a while, you're just so sick of damn stories, right? And if you're a writer, you want to get them on the page. So for one thing, you can stop telling the story, because if you want to read that, if you want to know the story, read the book, right? But and then you start to say, you realize you told the story 25 times, 45 times, 85 times, and then when you write it down, you realize it doesn't make any sense at all. I couldn't possibly have done it that way, right? So there were a lot of times when that happened to me, is I would tell stories that, there some of the stories in here. It's the white coat. The story about listening to the guy talk about what happened in Chile. I've told that story many, many, many times. The idea of doctors torturing other doctors in prison. I mean, that was one of the most striking moments in my life, listening to that testimony. But writing it down and trying to figure out when did it happen and and looking, you know, from a long way back, looking at how fresh it was that Allende was overthrown, and the tortures and things. It just, in retrospect, it's not the same story that you told all those times, and that's something that I definitely got out of writing this book. Let me share with you a couple things. First of all, this is a copy of the book, so you can just see it. And
you said you did the artwork?
I did that, yeah.
Wendy didn't do it.
No, I didn't want Wendy to do this one.
No.
Wendy's done most of it.
His wife is an artist.
She's a printmaker. She helped me print it because you know it was her studio, so she had the ink, and so I cut the linoleum block, and it actually comes from there's the picture that it comes from is in the book, and these are. These are the photographs that are in the book, so I'll pass those around too. But this is the photograph that I used to make the. Well, it's flipped because when you do a linoleum cut, if you do it the same as this one, when you print it, it's the opposite, because printing is always backwards. So you know if you put like if you'll see there is a bit of Hebrew lettering above the family there. I had to do that backwards because if you do it the right way, when you cut it, it turns out upside down. It turns out backwards.
Hebrews left to right, or
Hebrews left to right as it is. Yeah. So I just be careful. Yeah, right. So I'll just pass these around. Here, I'll pass around this order. So this is I'll just tell you this is my grandparents on my father's side. This is the Orthodox side of my family, the Orthodox Jewish side, and then this is the Reform Jewish side. This from Cleveland. This is from New York. This is my mother's family, and then these are various pictures that you can kind of go through. As you can see, that there was a prolonged hippie stage, so that's part of what.
Well, and, you know, but just like to say, it's these must be great memory cues, obviously, and you know, you all too, in your young lives, probably have plenty of old pictures to look over when you're trying to recreate these memories, like you're saying, and sort of get them halfway accurate. And then look at this. I guess you're going to talk to us next about these journals that sound like you've been keeping your whole life.
Well,
so.
that's actually really. Why in many ways that's one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book is I have I didn't count it before we came over, but I probably have I probably have 30 journals. I started keeping a journal. Well, I never found this journal, but the first journal I was keeping was, I know, in 9th grade, because I remember, although again I couldn't find the entry. I'm pretty sure I couldn't find the entry. I remember writing a really, really bad little poem after I had my first kiss.
I knew you were going to say. I knew it was going to be a
and in fact, I ran into this woman at a reunion about 10 years ago.
Oh
yeah,
my
and
God.
I told her that my first poem was written about kissing her. And she said, "Oh, I want to see that poem." And I just no. That's some things you don't really share. But so I didn't really start keeping a journal really regularly until my first year of college. I have some journals from high school, and in the chapter on high school. I was able to quote some things, so writing this was helpful because I had these journals. I've been keeping them for years and years and years, and it's not that they were useful at the time as I was writing for exactly the reason you say, is that at the time just making things make sense. That's what you do. You use a journal for. But since I had them all, I thought I had to do something with these damn things. And they were incredibly valuable for reconstructing things, even though I was such a son of a bitch when I was a kid. So I wouldn't let myself, and I remember quite clearly thinking this, I would not let myself write about what was happening to me at the time, because I was so busy trying to trying to learn to write poems, trying to write about things I was reading. That was what my journal was for. So there are times where I'm reading this thing and I know something very big has happened and it's not in the journal and I'm really mad, but I can kind of triangulate from things that I've said and even drafts of old poems that because I have, I mean, it's crazy what I've kept, but I have file folders of drafts of old poems. And so I was able to reconstruct through that and then through the internet what was happening at certain times. And I didn't actually start dating my journals until, well, I think until medical school. So that was another problem, is that trying to figure out what the date was for this, this entry. So what I brought with me today just to show you, not all of the journals look exactly like this. My early journals were actually all in, I don't know if you've ever seen, they still sell them, these marbled covers, black and white marbled covers like the old school notebooks. So they have a little label in the front. Yeah, that's what I used for many years. And then spiral note. I used some spiral notebooks. And then, so I don't know when I started this, but these are really great because these are just sketchbook. They're just empty sketchbooks. So they just allow me to take a lot of space. And if as you can see, that's a scary amount of space. It's a scary amount of space. And that has really always been one of the challenges in my writing life, is saying, okay, every morning I'm writing, I'm facing a blank page. That's my job, and that's hard, but that's the challenge. And you just repeat the challenge every time, whether you covered all the spaces before or not. When you get to the next page, it's a blank journal again, and there is something. It's a little like spring training in baseball. You spring. What does it say? Hope springs eternal. When you have a new space, you can maybe a better poem will come out this time. But this one I brought because this is the journal that I'm keeping right now. This one I'm going to pass around, and even though I need to, I asked my wife, she's going to help me fix this thing, but this was the journal I carried with me to Latin America, and I didn't bring a camera, and in fact I didn't bring much of anything. I had a backpack, and I traveled eight months in Central America and Mexico and by the time I left Nicaragua, I had 20 books and a pair of pants, essentially. But I did carry this notebook. So, and I did a lot of sketching while I was gone. And so the book has in it, there's a little. So this section you see, it has the pictures that I passed around to you, and then a few of the sketches that I did in this journal. I went to Latin America right after my first marriage broke up, and I just needed to leave. So, and I didn't know when I was going to come back. That's another chapter in the book. But I think one of the things that relates to this, again, why I wrote this, is trying to understand the distinction between the writer as the individual hero, which is how in the West we think, particularly if you're a lover of the romantics, you fall in love with with Keats dying of tuberculosis at a shockingly young age. He gets younger every day. Every day I get older. Or Shelley, who was not a whole hell of a lot older. But that whole concept of the individual genius in the attic or the basement or someplace just trying to bang out a great poem that changes the world. And as I got older, I started to feel like that was an incomplete picture of writing. And then as I began to get involved with composition and rhetoric with our field, the field of composition and rhetoric really says something very different about writing. It says the kind of the central concept of literacy in composition and rhetoric is writing as social, that we always write to people and from people, and that we always write we write in a language which is a language itself is a social organ. So I tried in this book in many ways to reconcile those two, and what I end up with is something that, in my view, neither one of those views is adequate to understanding writing, because we are always social and we are always alone, and then the trip to Latin America, the really another version, if you will, a macro version of that same polarity is the version of about politics, right? How do we function as political beings? And as writers, are we individualists who write for our own aesthetic reasons, or our own emotional reasons, or our own meaning-making reasons, or are we writing for some political purpose, or to try to change the world, and so on? And I think, so at the macro level, I think that this book, I like to think this book is really, again, saying you can't really do only one. You can't be writing only for yourself, because you are always committed to a politics, whether you accept it or not. You're always part of a political system. You're always part of a worldview that has a political dimension to it. But even at your most political, when you're acting as a community organizer or a politician or whatever you are, there's also always the personal, right? So, and if we don't believe that, we could just look at the news and see poor General Petraeus. I mean, here's this guy who's really, given his life for an intent. I mean, there is nothing more social than being in the Army, because you're not alone very much at any time in the military, and you're taught that from the moment you're there. That's what the buddy system is. But at the same time, both Petraeus and Allen, somebody just said to me the other day, so he said on the radio, this is if we ever needed to know again that generals were human beings, this is what tells us. So there's always the personal and there's always the political. So let me shut up and could you send me the cards? And what I'd like to do is, and if you don't mind, I'm going to share this with Karen, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
And I'll just kind of look through some of the questions, and while I'm doing that, if anybody has a question that you wrote down and that you want to say, oh, I'm sorry, there are some cards over there.
And the first side is why.
So, does anyone have a question that you want to ask right away before I read out some of the questions? I mean, you read what you read, and yeah.
This is a question about how you write. So, how do you go about writing the book? Do you sit down every day at a certain time and say, I'm going to sit here for an hour and just keep writing and I won't get out of this chair?
Yeah.
Or do you do a little bit, come back, or you only write when the fancy strikes you? How's your writing pattern look like?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. That's one reason I brought the journal is that at one level, and there are different kinds. I mean, most of my poetry starts with the journal. But the book, but when I do either academic writing or when I write prose, and even sometimes in poetry, I really compose at the computer. This is another lie imputed to the Romantics, even though I don't really think the Romantics really believed a lot of things we think the Romantics believe. It's not about inspiration. Inspiration is part of everything. But if you waited around for the inspiration, you'd probably be waiting a long time. And sometimes, you know, maybe in the early days you get a lot of inspiration, but you could go weeks without getting a knock on the door, and that it's going to leave you waiting at the street corner a lot. And I had and I think I'd say this in the book somewhere. I had a professor at university who was a very well-known poet, a guy named A.R. Ammons. And Archie used to say to his workshop, he'd say, you know, about writer's block, he said, you know, when I'm faced with the blank page, I'm standing on the same street corner waiting for the same trolley that the rest of you are. The only difference is I've been doing this long enough that I know that sometimes the trolley comes. He said the key is you've got to be standing on the corner when the trolley comes. And the only way to stand in the corner is to be at that desk. So I think it's a combination. You have to be disciplined, because in the end you will not get any work done if you're not disciplined, if you're not there at your desk. Whenever that is, you work best late at night, you work best in the morning. When I was in college, I worked late at night and I could sleep in the morning. Once I started teaching high school, you know, that was over. So I used to get up at 4 in the morning to write, and so I could write before, and then I'd have to grade math papers. You know, so you figure out what's going to work for you. My sessions poems, which is the first full-length book that I wrote, they're called sessions because they were built on early morning writing sessions, and so that's part of it. On the other hand, you don't have to write much. You know, I think that a lot of people worry that wow, I'm not really a writer because I didn't write 8 pages, I didn't write 10 pages, I didn't write. If you write a good paragraph on a day, and maybe it takes you 5 hours, and you write a lot of things that you throw away, but if you write a good paragraph or a good page, or you know, on a really, really great day, you write 3 pages. You know, my friend Sue Wells, who's my colleague at Temple, I think she's quoting Adorno, who says, "On a day, the day on which you have written, deny yourself nothing." So you have to let yourself feel good. That's the other part of it. Is that if you spend 5 hours and you only wrote one paragraph, and then you beat yourself up the rest of the day, you know, you're not going to be in good shape for the next day. So I don't know. Does that help answer that question?
So do you sit down then, like, do you work every day, or do you, like, you do it for maybe a week and then you step back and you're like, let me go?
Well, I work every day at Temple. Is the problem.
Yeah.
So during the summers or when I'm on sabbatical, I work every day. I mean, there are occasions, you know, where something, you know, the car gets crashed, or the house has the basement is a leak or something, you know, anything like that. Sometimes you can't do it, but I try to work, you know, as regularly as possible. It really helps that I have a wife who's very, very disciplined about her studio time, and so you know, I can't let her get too far ahead of me. So she, you know, and it's internal too. You know, you just, after a while, once you're doing it, it's like going to the gym. If you're into going to the gym, if you haven't been to the gym for a couple of days, it starts to really hurt. And writing is the same way. You just get this ache. You got to just keep going. But there are times where, you know, it's like when I finished the book, it was hard to. I mean, like, I wasn't writing much poetry at all in the last 6 or 8 months of writing this book, because everything was going into this book. And actually, I did find that I wrote more poems than I thought I did, but you know, 5, 6 poems in a year, particularly when I was working on this. And then there's an ebb, and you can work on other things. So the other thing, that's another part of this, is you don't need to only work on one thing. And you don't need to start at the beginning. And you probably all know this too, even from writing papers. If you're starting with the first paragraph and you're spending hours and hours and hours writing that first paragraph, don't write the first paragraph, write the 5th paragraph, and then go back and write the first paragraph. Because if you write the first paragraph, you're not going to keep it anyway, because it's not going to end up being about the paper that you really wrote. So you just write wherever you write, and then you fill it in. I mean, I wrote many, many things that didn't get in this book.
Sorry, one more follow-up question
Sure.
with that too. So, like, do you edit as you go along? And when I mean edit, I mean, like, do you write all your stuff and then you go back and do a big edit? Or do you just kind of, like, write and edit as you go, write and edit, like, see what you like and whatever, and then when you're done and you think you're done, then you go back and do, like, a full edit?
That's a hard question these days with computers, right?
Right.
Because, so I would say I do all those things. When I'm writing, I'll write and I'll do some editing. No, I didn't mean that, and wrote that. But I also have to. I have to do a lot of rereading, and then of course with a book, you get what you think is a draft after working for 3 years. You send it off to the publishers. They send it to 2 or 3 readers, and the readers come back and say, "We like this. We hate this. You got to change this. How about this? You did right." I mean, it drives you completely crazy. The first time when you first send it out and the readers' reports come back, and you read these reader reports, even if they said, "We really want to publish this," just look at the readers' reports, and then you want to kill yourself when you read the readers' reports. You say, "They want me to do what? Are they crazy?" And you have to let it sit for a week or even 2 weeks, and then you go back and say, "Well, that wasn't actually as much as I thought it was to do." So, but I have one of the readers in this book, and he's since told me he was the reader, and I've known him for a long time.
But you didn't know he was reading?
I didn't know he was the reader, although I kind of thought he might have been. But once I even did know he was a reader, he gave me such crap, particularly about the preface. The preface was 3 times as long as what you read, and it had all kinds of scholarly stuff in it, and it was references to Foucault, and and a lot of definitions and all that stuff. And he kept saying, "Send it back to Eli. You don't need all that shit. Just cut that out." And I'd cut out some more and I'd send it off to him, and Keith would say, "Oh, you can cut that paragraph out too." So and it was really, really hard because the book is not academic at all. Really, I mean, there's if you know the literature that I'm coming out of, both the poetry literature and the creative writing,
You can see
the comprette, the literacy stuff, you can see it in it, but it's not really what I talk about. But the introduction, I felt like I was talking to the scholars, having to justify what I did, and Keith kept saying, "You don't have to do that. Just let the book do what it does." So that was really, really important. But so readers are very, very important for almost, poetry works a little differently, but for prose, you're always rewriting. So I've rewritten this book. You can't even count the rewriting,
Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody asked, "Is Villanova in the book?" And I don't. It's not in the book. I don't think it. There might be a little bit somewhere in there, but not very much, because I actually stopped the book when I'm going to graduate school in English in 1983, and I did that. I do that on purpose because, and it's nothing against Villanova or Temple or anything else, but quite honestly, my life was a lot more interesting before I went to graduate school in English. I traveled Latin America. Anyway, and it's not that I think my life has been at least as fulfilling and certainly a lot happier. I was a lot happier person when I was here. But the story I needed to tell was before I turned 30. And I don't, some people have said, well, why don't you write a second book about the other stuff? And I don't really want to. I mean, it's not, there's, I got a lot of stories, and, when, we could meet in a coffee shop or a bar, and I'll tell you some of the stories, but they don't belong in the book. They don't belong in the book, I don't think, I could tell you things about Jack Doody. No. No.
I don't know if they even know Jack Doody. Do you know?
You know Jack Doody?
No, he's kind of
Is
a little bit
he's not in here?
retired. He reshaped the core, and then either he's retired or he took a break and will come back. He was our dean of arts. Well, for a while.
He was the acting
arts
dean
yeah.
of arts,
anyway,
and arts and science.
and in philosophy department and in theater too, I think. And he was a big player. He's always been a big shaper, player of Villanova curriculum and Villanova activities.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean, if Jack were here, I would have said the same thing.
Yeah.
But now, somebody asked us a really good question. Did you worry about offending people? You wouldn't know this, but but I noticed that I wrote this book after my mother died. Not that I would have said anything here that my mother would have been offended at, but years ago, the first piece of writing, which was the prelude, was the first time I tried to write something that I see as the forerunner of this book. I told a story about my mother, which from my point of view was true, and she got really offended. But my mother was very careful about things.
She would never hold a grudge.
She'd never hold a grudge, well, actually, the story goes that I was seeing a psychiatrist when I was a kid in high school, and he was real. I mean, he's dead, so I was able to write about him. And I remember that's in the white coat. Maybe right, because it happens earlier. He was a real jerk, and he did some very bad things to me. And nothing physical, but it was bad that I worked with him. And he told my mother that when I graduated from high school that he didn't think I was that stable, and he didn't think he couldn't vouch for my safety if I went to college. And my mother said, "Thank you very much. We'll get back to you or not." And she, I don't think she actually even told. In fact, I know she didn't tell me that he'd said that until after I was 2 years into college. But she herself, because having lost her husband and all the things that she was about, she wanted some therapy, and she couldn't really come up with anything. So she went back to this guy who. And then she stopped, and he called her for a date. That's what it was. He called her for a date, and I tell this story, and she was so creeped out by this guy that I remember her saying to me that she told him to fuck himself. Now I wrote that in an article. And my mother was my best writing teacher. So when she would read something. And she would read something, and she'd put a little pencil dot by something she wanted to talk to me about. And then that pencil dot would grow into, a very complex analysis of what I'd done, and where's the evidence for this, and how about the parallel structure here, and she had this little dot by this story, right? And she said, that wasn't how it happened at all, and I would never have used language like that. But I swear to this day that she told him to fuck herself. At least that's how I want to think about it for the rest of my life. And I've taught a course, like a personal writing course, for a number of times at Temple. And this is a big problem with personal writing, right? If you're writing something that you really care about, even if what you're saying is in a loving way, you're worried that you're going to offend somebody. And there's no right answer for this at all. But my experience has been that students who have written things and said to me when they turned them into me, I could never show this to my parents. It's some, pretty difficult stuff. very often they were able to show it to their parents, and very often it turned out to be a really good thing. Now, on the other hand, both my brother and my sister have this book. Neither one of them has said anything to me about it, except my brother objected to something in the first page. And so, now I don't know. I think
you're good to both.
I think I'm pretty good to both of them.
As
But my brothers wouldn't. It's not like him necessarily to talk about it. So, anybody have a question? You have a question?
No.
No.
You?
Yeah.
So are you saying that maybe it doesn't matter? Well, not that it doesn't matter, but that you shouldn't worry about offending somebody as long as you're like being as truthful as you can, or maybe she didn't say what you thought that she said, and you're just, but that's a better story, and so like.
Well, there's that too. That gets back to the fictional thing, right? You're making it up, even if you think you're telling the truth, right? I don't think it is right to say, don't worry about offending anybody, just tell the truth, because there are things that I chose not to put in this book that I would really just not like to have in print, that I know are true or that I feel are true. They weren't that important to me. I think it has to do with trying to get it right for all the factors of what you're trying to get accomplished. If you're just, of course, we know that there are books that are written primarily to even the score, right? There's lots of books like that, and apparently they sell very well, so people keep writing them. That's not really what the kind of book I wanted to write, and I don't really have that many scores. Of course, it's also why I didn't want to write about graduate school, so I would say sometimes we're afraid to write things that we feel are true because they're going to offend people, and they turn out not to offend people because they turn out to make a connection with people, because they may be struggling with things too, and it may be a way to help. I would say I don't think that it is not my sense of my own practice that I would say anything knowing it would hurt somebody. I think I can say that. I did change some names in the book. About half the names are not half. Names of people that I know that I could contact, and I would say I would contact them and ask them if like my girlfriend from high school. I asked her if she wanted me to use her real name or not, and she said no. I'd like to use another name, so I gave her another name. My former wife, even though she read the chapter about our breakup, she fell in love with another woman. She's living with the same woman now after 30 years. She's read that chapter. In fact, I haven't given her the book. I owe her a copy of the book. And I said some hard things, not against her, but it was a really hard time for both of us. And I did want her to say she felt okay about the chapter, because I didn't want to publish anything that I thought would be hurtful to her. And I could have said things that were hurtful to her, but I don't feel that way about her. So that's part of this thing about what do you get out of it too. It has to do with meaning making. It has to do with trying to come to some, wisdom is very hard to come by, and you don't necessarily want to claim that you have wisdom even if you have it. But it's really a lot more important than knowledge, in a lot of times. So that's another reason that you write, is try to figure out how do you resolve all these really hard emotional elements. You had a question.
I was just wondering, when you decided you needed to get away, if there's a reason why you chose Latin America.
Well, I had some specific reasons, and I had some not so specific reasons. The not so specific ones were that my former wife and I had planned to go to Latin America together. So I figured, well, if we're going to break up, I might as well go on that trip, right? And not only that, but she wanted to go to South America, and I really wanted to go to Central America, so that way I got to go to Central America. The specific reason was that the Nicaraguan Revolution had just happened in the summer of 1979. They drove the Somoza family out, and eventually blew him up with a bazooka in Uruguay. Where was it? You remember? He was a very, very bad man. I was really interested in the Nicaraguan Revolution, and one of the reasons was because the directorate of the Sandinistas that took over the government, I don't know, maybe there were 9 people in them. 6 of them were published writers, and I was really interested in what a revolution run by writers would look like. Some of them were really, really very good writers. Ernesto Cardenal, who was the Minister of Culture, is a very, very fine poet. And so I wanted to see what writers would make of a country. That was the main reason. I was really interested in the archaeology of Central America, the Mayans, the not so much the Aztecs, but particularly the Mayans. And it turned out Guatemala in those days it still is one of the most beautiful countries on earth. It's now a lot more screwed up than it was in those days. And it was just the beginning of what later became a long war and civil war in Central America. What's our timing like? We almost finished?
Well, 4:15 is
4:15.
our
Okay.
class, yeah.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Did that help? Yeah, I mean, it was sort of arbitrary. I could have gone other places, but I was interested in learning Spanish, and so that's one of the reasons I took a little Spanish before I left, and then I studied Spanish in Guatemala, and then nothing concentrates the mind better than threats of being killed in a language you're trying to learn. So you learn it pretty quickly.
Well, and I have to add that those writers did a pretty darn good job, I think, of making a government there. There were just a lot of very exciting things going on. One thing, actually, I went there and studied them too, and they had Ernesto Cardenal, the Minister of Culture, pull together poetry workshops because his idea was to democratize poetry, which it's not so far-fetched down there because people write more poetry. They were always asking me, where are my lines? ¿Dónde están tus líneas? You know, and I didn't really have any lines. I was not a poet, but anyway, they did a lot of great things, a lot of democratizing and redistributing land and things, but then they didn't get to finish their experiment because of the Contra War that Ronald Reagan started, and we finished their experiment in a couple of years, and that was that. And then they went through a period of they had various kind of puppet people down there, and then some right-wing people were supposedly elected. And now, one of those writer poets, Daniel Ortega, right, he's back, and
he's a right wing.
Yeah, he's changed a lot. So the dream that we went to find out about was destroyed by our own country. So it was kind of upsetting.
It was pretty upsetting. I will say that they, making a revolution is one thing. Governing is a very, very different thing. And they weren't, they did some really cool things. I mean, if you want to know what the revolution in Nicaragua was like in the end of '79, beginning of '80, what you need to do is study with Evan Radcliffe. What book in the Prelude is it?
Book 9 and 10.
Book 9 and 10 of Wordsworth in France after the French Revolution.
That's right.
Because there is something about revolutions that, after you've had them, and of course I don't really recommend them because they're terrible, terrible things for a country to go through. Terrible things for a country to go through. But once it's done, there is this moment where everybody thinks the world can be made new. And it was an astonishing place to be, is Managua in 1979 and 1980. I got there in March of 1980.
They called us the Internacionalistas,
right.
And we were sort of cool to be. We were happy to participate. People were very happy.
Well, they weren't. When I was there, it was the chapter is about Nicaragua. It's called Viajeros Extranjeros, Viajeros means travelers. Extranjeros means strangers or people who come from other countries. And when I was there, first of all, they weren't real happy about having North Americans in Managua.
No, well, see, I was later. I was
You were
in
there
'84.
later. Yeah, and by that time, people were, they
were
wanted
used
help.
to-
Where-
you had been
were
a
used to-
pioneer there,
Yeah.
so.
So they would, just little kids would run up to us and say, "Fuera la CIA, fuera la CIA," which means "Get out, CIA." But they were happy, and nobody, with the exception of one very difficult moment, people were actually really friendly, and they'd say really nasty things to you with a smile on their face, and they really didn't mean you. They meant, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. They meant. This is before the Contras really were big, but yeah. There was one that I really wanted to. I thought was. Somebody asked about. Do you find that the knowledge you gained through studying biology and being in med school highly influenced your writing, particularly your poetry? That's a really difficult question. I would say I'm somebody who likes knowledge. I've always been attracted to knowing stuff. But I don't think that knowledge necessarily is. You have to know things to be a writer, because at the very least, you want to know what you're getting yourself into when you say something or when you write something. But I think what I learned most in medical school, what I took most from medical school was not the biology part. It was the people part. It was understanding, for instance, everything from the incredible class structure of healthcare in this country. I talk a little bit about that with the Chilean thing. Who are the nurses? Who are the general doctors? Who are the orthopedists and the neurologists in the class structure of healthcare in this country? And that itself is, very interesting. And my father was a plastic surgeon, but he was in the Army, so everything was just rank. So he wasn't that old, so he wasn't very high ranked. And a general surgeon who's a colonel or a general outranks a plastic surgeon who's only a major, even though in the medical world a plastic surgeon has a higher prestige than a general surgeon does. So that was a strange thing in growing up, and it was interesting to see. But it was the people I met in hospitals, it was the people I worked with, the so-called patients. It was the nurses the nursing students who were friends of mine and who said things about how doctors were learning things and how nurses were learning things. I mean, it's just so interesting how nurses think about patients and how doctors are trained to think about patients. See you. It was so nice to see you.
You have to go right. Yeah, if she goes left.
So I think, for my poetry, but I think, and in general for a writer's education, I can't speak for other writers. For me, relationship is so central to understanding literacy, because literacy is so much about connecting these individual units that we think of as humans, and understanding how do you listen to people and how do you talk to people. One of the real challenges of medicine is that doctors are so busy doing things to people that they're not really able to listen to people. So that's something I learned in medical school, is that I really took in. I would say that medical school was more influential for me as a teacher in a certain way than as a writer. Despite the fact that I've been talking nonstop for the last hour, in my view, the most important skill that a teacher can have is listening, not talking. And I learned that in medical school. We had one of these, rounds where we had 170 medical students talking to a patient that this doctor had. It was a patient that he'd worked with for years, who was very, very heavy, and he was kind of debriefing with her about her problems and diet and all this kind of things, and the struggles. And he knew there were big emotional things, but in the course of this conversation, she revealed for the first time to him that she had been raped by her father, and he'd never known that. You know, he knew a lot about her. He knew a lot about her emotion, her family. He knew a lot, but she'd never told him that, and it came out in front of a whole audience of people because of a question somebody asked, and that's sort of the problem of medicine, because as doctors, doctors are always trying to do, and and always trying to diagnose, but a lot of times you can't get over the fact that somebody is scared of you, and so that's a really hard thing. People get scared of professors, so they don't tell the professors things that are really important sometimes.